Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am here to do my first update of reading since I have finished my 100 book challenge. And I've been rather dithering on what should replace my 100 book challenge, because that challenge allowed me to give a very quantitative update every week of how many books I read and how close I am to finishing it. So after some consideration, I have decided to do a 55K page challenge, and that is for me to read 55,000 pages in the year 2022. So I count all my ebooks, I count all my print books, and I am counting my audiobooks as an equivalent of reading it, because I really don't like to make the distinction between audiobook and paper book or digital book. They're all books that I read. So I will be looking up the equivalent of whatever audiobook I finish and counting that towards my total. Now, the last book I read for my 100 book challenge was Geek Love. And finishing that, I was at 13,175 pages. So what have I been reading since then? The first book that I finished was an audiobook called American Religious History by Patrick and Allitt. Now, this is technically college courses. They're just lectures that the professor reads. I listen to them. And I do want to eventually give a whole big spiel on great courses, because the great courses are just a really marvelous way to get a university level education without having to schlep over to the university and sit through a class in a college campus and take tests. You just have to absorb the information and enjoy it as much as you want to and move on. Now, this course, again, was on American religious history. It is describing American religious history from its beginnings and to its to what was contemporary. And this course is about 20 years old. So it started off in England and talking about King Henry VIII and his decision to basically form his own religion so he could get a divorce, and how that made people move to the United States. And you will find all sorts of religions here. He does the professor does a very good effort to give a complete view of the different types of religion in the United States throughout history. And I won't go through all the different religions, but one of my favorite was talking about the American Indian religious tradition. And he mentioned a little anecdote with the Jesuits trying to, I believe it was the Iroquois. And they were trying to teach the Iroquois about eternal damnation and eternal fire. And the American Indians went to the Jesuits and go, "No, I'm not worried about eternal damnation. There's not enough firewood to burn that long." And I just thought that was a rather modern view of ecological science, that there is a finite amount of resources, and they immediately saw that you could not have eternal fires because we do not have eternal resources. So that was very interesting, and I highly recommend any of the great courses that people just dip in and try them. After that, I finished a book, and the great courses would have been equivalent about 375 pages. The next was a print book that I've already discussed before. That was read for March Mystery Madness, and that is My Gun is Quick by Mickey Spillane. And that was a measly 174 courses. Now, I did do a separate video on that, so you can just look up that to see what my opinions of that book are, but it's a decent little mystery. After that, I was in the Dominican Republic on the beach reading on my Kindle, and I read The Goat Castle Murder by Michael Llwellyn. And that was on my trusty Kindle. And that is 392 pages. I did a review of that. This is a fairly good historical mystery set in Natchez, Mississippi. And if you like historical mysteries, it's well worth your time and effort. The Kindle version is like $2.99. Then on the beach, I read again on my trusty Kindle, The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And Donna Tartt is just a really amazing author. She wrote this book when she was young. She was under 30, and it just so full of learning and details that I was mesmerized by how someone that young could be that erudite. And it is a story of the murderer of college students murdering another college student. Now, that's given away in page 1, so it's no spoilers. I did enjoy this book pretty good. My one complaint about this book is that the actual murder takes place a little bit over halfway, and after that, it turns into a campus novel where you have the students doing a lot of drugs and talking a lot about a college life. And for whatever reason, college life just really doesn't interest me that much. So that did drop back my enjoyment of the book a little. But one of my favorite sections of the book was talking about the ancient Greek language and how you decline the verbs. And I'm going, dang, I missed it when I was in college. I really should have taken ancient Greek because I think I would have found it fascinating, even though I'm a terrible speller and all that declining the verbs probably would have blown my brain up. But it's a good book, well deserved. And it's the only book by Donna Tartt that I have read. She has only written 3 novels in her life. She takes about 10 years to write a novel, which, I think is a different way to do novels, and I think that works for that author. After that, I finished an audiobook, The Long Ships by Frans G. Bengtsson. I also have a complete video on my opinions on that, and that is a NYRB classic, even though I listened to it on audiobook. It is about the Vikings, and it's quite enjoyable. After that, I read one of my novels for the BookTube Prize in Fiction, and that was Bewilderment by Richard Powers. And because that is a BookTube Prize, I'm not going to say anything about that. Then came Watership Down. Oh, and Bewilderment was 268 pages. And I forgot about the Long Ships was 528, and Secret History was 591. So after Bewilderment, I read Watership Down as an audiobook. This was part of Criminali's event to read a book every year for the book he did the birth year book tag. And in that, people made suggestions of their favorite book written in a year. And he is going to read a book, all those books, to count down the years. And the book was it 72? Was, again, Watership Down. And he had a group reading that on his Discord channel. Now, this is not a book that I would normally read on my own. It is often classified as a young adult novel, and I can see that, even though it's a little more advanced than what I would think of a young adult novel. When I think of young adult novels, I think of teenagers, and this is, of course, a book about rabbits. And there is a lot of musings about other subjects here. The author famously says it's not about anything, it's about rabbits. However, there's a lot more to this book than just about rabbits. And one of the big ones I notice is that rabbits were forming a warren and were having trouble with another rabbit warren nearby. And that other warren was very much modeled on the Soviet Union, because this book was probably written in the late 60s or early 70s. So that Cold War feeling and that total distrust of the Soviet Union was just emanating from what these rabbits were doing in their warren. Overall, I liked this book. I did not love this book. I know it is a favorite of some people, and I think I can understand why some people would really fall in love with this book. However, for me, it was just an ordinary novel, although reading about rabbits was kind of fun and interesting and something I'm probably never going to do again. And after that, I finished my March of the Mammoth, and that is War and Peace. This is a challenge of a book. It is certainly the longest novel I have ever read. In this edition, it is 1,399 pages of, as you can see, very small print. I had to pull out my reading glasses to get through a lot of this. Now, when I was reading this book, I got through a lot of it, and then I was going to the Dominican Republic. And I said, I do not want to carry this book on the plane with me. So I switched translations to the P&V, and that's Pavir and Larvansky. I'm not sure about the last woman's name. And it's not that hard to switch translations midstream. There's a little bit of a difference. Some of the names are a little bit different. Sometimes they're not spelled the same, but the big difference between this Briggs translation and the P&V translation was the P&V translation followed the original Russian very closely and included the original French. Because if you were an aristocrat in French in this era, if you're an aristocrat in Russia in this era, you spoke French as well as Russian. And most of their soirees and private conversations, a lot were done in French. So there was a lot of French dialogue in the P&V translation. And so what you'd have to do is you look through the dialogue, see if there's any sort of bit of text in between that dialogue, describing any mannerisms or hand gesture movements or something, and then hit a footnote to get the translation into English. And I found that quite a slog. So once I got back from the Dominican Republic, I started picking up on the Briggs translation again. But then I switched to the Maud translation with an audible backup, so I could read the Maud translation while reading while listening to the audiobook. And again, the switch of translations can be a little odd. Again, the names are a little bit different, like Andre in this book is Andrew, stuff like that. But overall, I found a very easy way to read War and Peace, even though ultimately I was dithering in and out of 3 different translations. My final assessment is that this is a fantastic book. I don't know if I would rate it as high as some other books that I really liked, but it's an experience. Part of the reason I think War and Peace is such a great novel is that it is just not a story. It is an experience you have to endure. You have to go through all the social drama of the Russian families. Some other booktubers have described it as a soap opera. And I don't think soap opera is entirely wrong. And then you have to go through the war sections. And the war sections can be a little grisly. War is not a pretty event. And Tolstoy does not pull back his punches. He lets you see war the way it is. There is one scene towards the end where one of the characters dies. And yet, that's not a spoiler. You know character's going to die in a book like this. But one of the other characters, Tolstoy just perfectly encapsulated this character's grief. He described it as like whimpering like a dog. And I could just see this staunch Russian officer holding back the tears for his dead comrade. And then there's all the Tolstoy interludes about his philosophy of war. Some other readers disliked Tolstoy's interludes. I actually found them fascinating. There was one point after Napoleon has marched to Moscow. Now, again, maybe that's a spoiler. Some people going into this book did not know that War and Peace was about Napoleon's invasion of Russia. I sort of knew it instinctively because I know my classical music. If you know Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, you know that Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812 and was victorious over France. And this book starts in 1806 with the woman declaring Napoleon the Antichrist. So it is about Napoleon. And but I enjoyed it. Now, going back to what I was saying is that Napoleon had basically conquered Moscow, and the army had fled, and the army got lax, and they did not expect such resistance from the Russian peasantry. And it seems that many military leaders underestimate the power of citizens not to want to have their country invaded. And yes, that has many contemporary comparisons. So I can still highly recommend War and Peace as a magnificent novel. And after War and Peace, I completed another BookTube Prize book. In War and Peace, again, I think I said was 1,399 pages. And the BookTube Prize book that I read was The Love Songs of W.E.B, and that was by Honoree, Fanonne, Jeffers, and that was 816 pages long. And that, again, on my Kindle. And I cannot say anything about this right now. So where does that leave me? I was at 13,175 pages. After I've completed this list of books, I am now at 1,896 pages done. And how does that compare to where I need to be? Well, it makes me about 86 pages short of my goal for this month. Now, as I am recording this on Sunday, on the 17th of April, I am pretty well sure that I'm going to read 86 pages. And in fact, I really have read 86 pages because I am in the middle of a couple other books. One of them is The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. And right now, I am on page 247. And this is turning into a magnificent group read that I have over at Voxer. I expected this to be a very difficult slog, but it is remarkably digestible. It's fascinating. It is the story of a sanatorium before World War I. And I'm reading the more modern translation, the James E. Woods translation, and I'm also listening to the audiobook while reading along. And so that is just going fantastic. And then with Miss Reads a Lot group, 1001 books, I am reading Walden by Thoreau. I am a little behind and not reading all my Thoreau, and I have to get back to that. And then I am also reading Storm by George R. Stewart. This is a book about a storm named Mariah. And Mariah is the main character of this book. It is how the storm Mariah interacts with all the events around her. I am finding this a little dry. George R. Stewart wrote one of my favorite science fiction novels, Earth Abides. But so far, as I said, it's just a little dry. And that is what I am reading. And again, that brings me up to 18,196 pages of my goal. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. Goodbye.